Okay, so I'm going to talk about hazards. Just a little bit of background. I was born and raised in Atlanta, actually in Tucker, Georgia. Right out of grad school, I worked for Delta Airlines with Jenny. I was the corporate industrial hygienist, so I know a lot about industrial hygiene. And then I did production safety consulting after I left Delta. And I've worked for Disney, Marvel, Sony, Paramount, Fox, ESPN, ABC Studios, you name it. And just recently came on board full-time for Fox. So when I speak today, I'm going to be speaking from the history and the experience that I had as a consultant for a number of different studios and not necessarily as an employee of Fox. Over this time that I've been working the past 8 years in the industry, I've obviously been lucky enough to witness the deluge of work that's coming into our area, and been able to follow and support the tax incentive that's working here. And as you all know, probably, we, from time to time find that we have run out of proper filming space. And that's one of the reasons why location managers and location choices are so important for us. Who knows the story about Buddy Ebsen? Anybody? Yeah. So, when we talk about different hazards, obviously there's a lot of them that have to do with locations, with our equipment, that sort of thing. But, it's important to also remember, the body burden of costumes and makeup. So Buddy Ebsen was the originally cast Tin Man in the Wizard of Oz movie, and he became gravely ill after he had an allergic reaction to the aluminum costuming, the paint on his skin. So, when we have cast members, that have, full body gear on, and we're working in July, and it's 90 degrees outside, you have to take into consideration, rest breaks, having people have adequate access to water, to other facilities, and if they have a mask on or if they have big boots on, having somebody help them to set back and forth is extremely important. It's also, extras, personnel that, come and help us, all right, on our sets, having adequate lighting to and from the sets and to and from Crafty or wherever they're going to go, so that they have a safe route, making sure that the 4-foot perimeter on the interior of all of your sets is clear, so in case, the lights do go out, you can feel your way along the walls to an exit, right? And it's all stuff that we take for granted. But at the same time, these are things that are unique and specific to our industry, but our local law enforcement, our fire, our emergency responders don't necessarily know these things. So when we're on location, it's actually a very good idea to invite someone, if you're working with something that is unique, that could be a problem, that has difficult access issues, to invite local fire and police department. First of all, they love coming to set anyway, right? And they love it, and especially when they find Crafty, they're like, "Oh my God, I'm never leaving." But they deserve to have, a good idea of what we're working with and how we're working with it. And so, especially if we think that, them responding to an accident or an incident on our set might be a particular challenge, inviting them to come and look around is not a bad idea.
Also, anybody know what AHJ stands for? Authority having jurisdiction. Okay, so that's kind of what Margaret's talking about, is that there's an awful lot of people who can come and have some kind of effect and authority over what you're doing. Because OSHA probably is not ever going to show up unless there's an incident, but the fire department will, the other people will. And creating those relationships, especially because, as she said, they don't know our business, you may even have to have resources available, because they're going to say, well, you can't do that. That's against the fire safety code from the fire regulations. And they say, yeah, but there's a code within those same regulations for sound stages, and be able to have those resources. And you may have to educate the AHJ where you are, realizing that the AHJ probably has the authority to do whatever they want.
Some of the other things, obviously, of the different hazards, non-routine things that we work with every day. So proximity to airports, to railroad tracks, et cetera. What about the adjacent properties, the places that we're filming, things that are next door? Are they producing something that has a noxious smell or an odor? It could be completely benign. It could be very safe, but just the fact that our crews show up and they smell it and they have questions about it warrants us the responsibility to look into it and make sure that it's safe, right? I think that's good.
If you come to LA, that's a big thing. We have a jail that everybody shoots at. And on the other side of the railroad tracks, there's a dog food processing company. And you smell that all day long. And the crews go home sick on a regular basis. So that's a very important thing to know what's in the proximity there.
And especially because it may seem silly, and this has happened at some of the studios where the landlord, the owner of the studio space, it wasn't one of the major studios, it was one of the minor ones, they're doing remodeling. So they've brought in a construction company to tear the thing apart. And there's big signs outside the construction zone talking about the asbestos exposure. Well, the crew had to walk past those signs to get to where they were working. And going back to what I'd said earlier, and the crew immediately, they see a big sign says asbestos exposure, not reading it where it says go past the sign, you're exposed. If you're standing, and there is nothing on it saying standing over here, you're fine, okay? I get phone calls right away. You know, Kent, we're being exposed to asbestos. Okay, it's not there. And the producer is saying, why do we have to do anything about it? Because you're responsible for the crew being there, and you don't want to keep getting the phone calls about what's happening. Let the crew know what's happening. The asbestos is being handled properly by the construction company of that other employer. And that's what you need to be able to do.
So then we also have a list here of some of the more common things that you'll find on a set without going into all of them. But, you know, lightning came up earlier. If you have a generator on set and you're within the lightning, that is like an electromagnetic attractant. And if you're standing next to the generator, it's probably one of the last things you might do. So we've got to be concerned about lightning, water, indigenous critters. Okay, and again, going back to risk assessment, was on a show where we had to put scaffolding into a bayou in Louisiana. And we're up to here in bayou water. And there's alligators and snakes and 3 brothers named Clem, all of them named Clem, with shotguns and no teeth. And they are our protection. That the risk assessment said, if a gator goes loose, we'll just shoot him. And my AC and I are going, who's going to kill us first, the gator, the snake, or the Clem brothers? So you got to be mindful of what protections that you're using there.
And one of the things, look at the slide and look at all, because these are all kinds of different scenarios that we're talking about going. And we kind of want to use this because we again don't have a lot of time to cover everything in detail. So get some of your reactions and questions you want. This gentleman, I'm sorry, sir, you had a question earlier wanted you to ask.
Hearing protection.
And that's all right. Okay, so you're sitting there looking at gunshots and stuff like that. It's one of the specialized things that you would deal with, okay? And the armor is a really weird thing because you have different AHJs having different qualifications, but you have one AHJ, which is the federal government, and firearms, what is it, ATF? Alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. Okay, so there are certain things that you need to be able to have. You don't always have to have an armorer, right? It's not an always thing. There are times when an armorer you need them for certain types of weapons. Okay, you have to have them because you can't get just basic weapons from without an armor. So semi-automatic weapons, those types of things. But other things, you can have someone who's qualified to handle firearms. I
don't believe that one is true, because for some things, for small handguns, a prop master will be the one to handle them. When you get into much larger either caliber or other loads to them, there are standards for that.
That's fine. In Georgia, there are some local law enforcement that require permits, but overall, it's not required.
But a real good idea.
Yeah, so it's like a lot of things, like special effects, pyrotechnics. Not all states require a license to do that. Okay, you can go just to the local fire department and they'll okay it. All right, but the ATF, to transport it, to do things with it after 9/11 is really extensive. So if you don't have somebody who knows what they're doing with pyro cards, you could be in real trouble. Okay,
Storage and disposal rules with
yeah, so yeah, a lot of stuff. Well, not just fireworks, but any pyrotechnics.
Right. And right. That's federal with the one card and that. But for locally, special effects and pyrotechnics need a permit through your local fire department. And some of them, depending on what it is, will require to have a representative on set when you do them. So it's always, as everything else has been today, you know, pre-planning, getting in touch with people ahead of time, and then asking them to work with you before you get to the location, right?
We're going to touch on the high hazard situation.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we have another for the higher hazard. So any questions about the common ones? You had a question. What was yours? Okay. Yes. Right.
We all know that you're going to be on set from about 12 to 16 hours average. When do you finally say fatigue is going to be an issue?
Well, and you're the producer. Why are you setting it up for 16 hours? And I'm only being slightly joking about it. Only slightly being joking about it. But the problem with fatigue is there aren't any set rules. When a while ago I did a lot of research, a lot of Air Force and Navy majors went to, and when they were getting their master's degree, which the Air Force and Navy liked their officers to get, and these were all pilots, they had, and actually not just pilots, they had these papers that they wrote to get their master's thesis on fatigue, how it affects what people do as they get, as they work. How many of you have ever heard that working for 12 hours is the equivalent of being drunk, right? Hear that all the time. It's the equivalent of having had too much alcohol. Well, the problem is that our bodies are kind of set up to work, to be awake 16 hours a day. So saying that is a little weird. But there's data after data after data about what the effects of fatigue are. And there is nothing set in stone of what you have to do. So again, reasonableness. Are we working people long hours? Do we leave them an Uber or a taxi or a place to go to sleep? And then make them do it. Again, you're the employer, make them do it. I don't want you to go and work this long hours because of the fatigue that will be. Yeah, one of the cool or great movies, or no, it wasn't a great movie, but a fun movie we did, is we did 10-hour days for French hours, but we were at Paramount the entire show, never left the studio. So we didn't have to wrap. Because a lot of people, what does a 10-hour day mean for the grips if you're out on location and they wrap camera at 10 hours? You may have had 2 hours ahead of time and 2 hours wrap. So you're not, you get in, again, to all this stuff. So the fatigue issue, you've got to look into it. Also, just had and I'm sorry, you have a question. Yeah. Right.
And for instance, like our show is in Atlanta, but we have crew from all over. Some may be in Fayetteville, some may be in Senoia, or I live in Kennesaw, some may be in Woodstock. So you have to always make sure of like where are you shooting and find out where your crew lives. Because even though you're shooting in Atlanta, you're shooting late. I don't want my guy from Woodstock, driving home, so you make sure he has a hotel. You just kind of get to know your crew, and they have to trust you that you care about them.
And you guys don't have any traffic issues in Atlanta, right? Okay, because I know where I live in Eagle Rock, California, Eagle Rock Studios, right near Pasadena. If I've got to go work in Santa Monica at 8 o'clock in the morning, I'm actually going to leave at 6 or maybe earlier to get there in time. And it's only 20 miles away. So there's all kinds of things you have to take into consideration in it. The other thing you have to take into consideration just was on a set last week where they'd been working for a long time and they were doing an awful lot of special effects makeup. So And the producer was doing the right thing in trying to look, not just with the turnaround time by day, but the turnaround time for the weekend. So they were starting Monday's work in a studio. They're working inside a space that they had control over at 11 o'clock in the morning on Monday, okay? And they would only working, I mean, they were only working 14 hours at the most, but they were working 12 to 14 hours but then because of the turnaround with the actors, with the 3 hours worth of makeup, the crew was getting 12 hours of turnaround, okay? So they're getting 12 hours of sleep or 12 hours away. But by the time they started with all the backup and stuff on Friday, they started work at 11 at night. Okay? And shift work is just as important. Shift work is considered anything that isn't normal work from like 7 in the morning to 6 at night. Okay, within an 8-hour day within that. Anything other than that is considered shift work. So just working nights creates fatigue. Okay? Just working that creates fatigue. There's all kinds of things that go into it. And that particular crew, they had 2 people in car accidents. Fortunately, nobody was hurt. But they had 2 people, even though their days weren't that long. And they actually were working right before the accident, only a 12 and a 13-hour day. But because of the shift work, because they were starting work at 11 o'clock at night, the night before, I'd gone on Thursday to their set. Crew call was 8 o'clock in the evening, on stage working short hours. So there's a lot to do with the fatigue. Reasonable people doing reasonable things. Does that make sense? Okay. And one of the things here in Atlanta and Georgia, and OSHA is really big on worrying about heat, and heat's a big deal. And the bad part of sometimes of crew members, certain of the crafts, they will call me and say, the producer is not turning on the air conditioning. We're in a trailer and we're too hot, and it's terrible. And OSHA does not worry about people's comfort. For heat, what they have to do is there has to be a shady place to go, there has to be plenty of water, and a place to be able to go to get cool. Okay? That's what they worry about heat. All right? And so you're going to sit there and knowing those things, that sometimes you're doing the best you can, you've got plenty of water and those types of things. You know, we're sorry it's so hot for you, but we're in Georgia. It's July. Okay? It's 112% humidity, which means it's raining, right? It's hot, okay? It's Africa hot, all right? So any of these things anybody want to talk about?
How many people are aware of the safety bulletins? I mean, how many are familiar with it? So some, I mean, that's just a really easy place to read through. They're only 1 to 3 or 4 pages each, but it'll give you just the high-level overview of what to look out for most of this stuff. It's just a real sort of a baseline understanding of how things work. You should familiarize yourself with those.
And actually, these topics, these bullet points were basically from the safety bullets.
Right. And
look at them, they're kind of safe, not all of them.
right. And is there a practice of attaching them to the call sheets still out here? Good.